Well, we come to a highlight of our study on Come Meet God, this account of where Israel is camped out at the Mount Sinai, and God is entering into this amazing covenant relationship with them. And if you look over chapter 20, if you have a Bible handy, you can just look down through the first few verses, and you suddenly realize, well, this is an important chapter because it contains the Ten Commandments. We might be tempted just to trying to charge ahead and, have no other gods before me and have no graven images, remember the Sabbath day, all these great commandments we want to talk about. And we are going to talk about them. But there's a couple of things that he introduces it with that are important for us to understand. I hope you have a study guide. I've got one right here in front of me. It should be available for download as a PDF wherever you're watching this from, wherever you got this video from. The main place is livingthewordtoday.com, and just go to the teaching series and you'll find it there. And that would be very helpful because not only does it kind of track what we're talking about so that kind of sticks in their mind, but it also has some discussion questions. And I want to encourage you to, if you're with somebody, have a discussion. Answer these questions out loud. If you're doing this with a small group, this makes a great small group study that you can be involved in. And just push pause when you come to those discussion questions. I'm gonna push pause to my teaching and just at least give reference to these questions. I'm not going to answer them all. Maybe I'll give a few of my thoughts. But I really want you to seek some understanding and some discussion when it comes to discussion questions. So you have that study guide, discussion guide with you, and have that there at the ready. Okay? So look at verse 1, chapter 20, Exodus. And God said, and God spoke all these words saying. So that's the preference. This is God speaking now. This is in quotation marks. This is a direct quotation from God. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And verse 3 goes right into, you shall have no other gods before me, and stop there. Because we're not going to look at the commandments in this session. I want to look at this reality of what the rules for life, God's rules for life, what are they based upon? What is the basis that we should even listen to this God? What should it matter that he spoke these words to us? What does it do to us to understand these things? Well, let's take a look into this a little bit deeper. First of all, we're going to say a couple basic things. Number one, first basic thing is this. God gets to make the rules. He gets to make the rules. You don't, I don't, we don't, someone else doesn't. He gets to make the rules. And that's what he sets up. He says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, verse 2. And that verse says so much. First of all, he gets to make the rules because he says, I am. And that kind of takes our thinking all the way back to chapter 3, where, remember Moses at the burning bush, he says, well, when I get back to Egypt to tell the people that I'm going to be the one who leads to set everybody free, well, they're going to ask me your name. What am I going to tell them your name is? And he says, just tell them, I am that I am. So it's a special name for God. It kind of means this, and different scholars have tried to encapsulate. I don't think anyone feels satisfied with their definition. But it's basically the one who causes to exist. It has something about existence, of being. It also could be translated this way or interpreted this way. He who lives and is. He just is. He's there. He's God. He's right there. He is who he says he is. With that in mind, he is beyond us because we still can't quite quantify that. We can't quite put that into a category that makes sense to us. We can't wrap our brains around it. We can't figure this out. That's because he is in a category all by himself. He is beyond us. He is above us. And there's a certain amount of specialness about him. So he gets to make the rules. And maybe we could say it this way. Because he is God, that he is above us, he is the authority and is trustworthy to make the rules. You'll see that quote in your study guide, your discussion guide. He is the authority and he's trustworthy. So we're going to look at both of those qualities as we think about this. But the first thing is his authority. His authority is based on what? I am. I am real. I exist. I cause everything to exist. There's nothing, think about this, there is nothing that exists that God did not make exist. Now, he's eternally existent, but it comes from within himself, his existence, if we could say it that way. And again, I said this all kind of breaks down. But everything you and I can relate to, everything physical, everything within this universe, he spoke into existence. So everything that exists has its origin, its beginning in who God is. He is the I am. Now, you think about the things that we have authority over. This particular shirt I'm wearing, I went to the store and purchased it. I can wear it as I see fit. I can hang it in my closet. I can put it in a suitcase and take it with me if I go on a trip. If I want to give it to somebody else, I can give it away. If I think it's getting old and frayed, I can discard it. Why? Because it's mine. If I came and got one of your shirts and did something with it, that would be seen as a violation because I don't own that shirt. That garment is not mine. This is mine. I can do whatever I want with it. Since God is the source of all things, He is the one who makes everything exist, He has that authority in and of Himself as the I am. And He says, I am the Lord. And if you look at your English translation, you no doubt will see that it's capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. All 4 letters are capitalized. That's a clue in English that this is a special word for who God is. Sometimes we've tried to put it into English as the old, it's kind of going out of style a little bit now, but Jehovah. Or we will try to take the 4 letters of the Hebrew and try to transliterate them into Yahweh. Although no one really knows how it's pronounced because the 4 letters that make up the word translated Lord are all consonants. The scribes thought it was so special and they thought it was so amazing, and Israel was so in awe of the name of God, the special name of God, that they would not pronounce it. So when they'd write it, they'd leave the vowels out, hoping that everybody else in their mind could fill it in. But now it's been lost to us. We don't know which vowels to put in amongst those consonants. So how it was pronounced, we don't know. We don't know. But it appears often in the Bible, in the Old Testament alone, more than 6,000 times this is pronounced. And the scribes, and remember before Gutenberg made the printing press and we come forward in technology, and now we've come really from that analog world into the digital world of communication. But if you go back into the 1500s, before that, anything that was transmitted in writing had to be done by hand, by a scribe. And there was a special class of people in Israel in the Old Testament days, and they also taught the law because they were so familiar with it. But they were destined and they were put in place to hand copy the scriptures. When they would come to this word, we are told by some historical records that whenever they came to this word, they would stop and get a new quill to be able to write the word out. They would also, before they made the first stroke of the word, they would have to leave their scribal table, go and completely bathe themselves, and come and write the name of God completely clean. You talk about reverencing the name. This was the name from God to Israel. It was the special name. It was the special covenant name. So the authority to Israel was not only because God exists and is and makes, but because He is their God. He is really the only true God, but He is their God in a special sense because of this covenant that He's now entering into. Why does He have this authority? Because it's a covenant relationship. They have already said in chapter 19, whatever you say we'll do. So that's the beginning of the acceptance of this covenant relationship. We'll see it more clearly as we go forward all the way over to chapter 24, where they really kind of lock down. We are accepting your words as ours. But anyway, it's this special covenant relationship. He has authority. And then He's also trustworthy. He says there, I am the Lord your God. I'm your God. I'm here for you. We have a special arrangement. We have a relationship. And by the way, that's kind of what we want to think about, because this moral code that we're going to see in verses 3 and following, the 10 Commandments, and the law that follows it in great detail in all facets of their life, this law, this moral standard only works if there is a relationship with this God. It only works if we know the God who made it. These laws do not just stand apart from the God who spoke them. They do not stand apart from the authority that God is God, or from the trustworthiness that He is able to pull this off. So He says to them, I am your God. Now you think about it. We need to be able to trust in this God. And think about it. Is there any reason we shouldn't trust God? Oh, wait, go ahead. Give me an answer. You're not going to come up with one, and neither am I, because God utterly keeps His promises. So let's take a run through some of these discussion questions. Why do we sometimes run to the rules and neglect a relationship? You think about that one. Why don't we just do the rules? Well, I'll give you a little hint, and you can go take it a little bit further. You can pause if you want to pause right now and give your answers before I give mine. I think one is the law is something maybe we can control. But a relationship with God, that's a little bit fearful and scary and a little bit cumbersome maybe to our wants and wishes. After all, we could spin the law, ignore the law, reinterpret the law. So it's not just the law, it's the person who gave it, a God who is authoritative. He owns us, He gets to make the rules, and He's trustworthy. They're what's best. They're what's going to work. Why? Because He's God. He knows what's best. And sometimes if we get into a place of disobedience, really we're not just challenging the law, but because we know this God, we have a relationship with Him, we are challenging His authority. We're saying, You know what, God? I know you're God, but I make the rules for me. Going to lead to trouble. Always has, always will. Question number 2. What if we have rules without relationship? What does that look like? If we just have rules without having someone behind it. Now, you might want to pause again. I'm going to give you just one idea, and you're going to have many more ideas as you think about it. But I just was thinking about that. If you have rules without relationship, then there's always a subtle effort to maybe reinterpret the rules or reinterpret their intention. Or does this really mean this at all times, all places? Now, when you come back to a God who's authoritative and trustworthy, it is as God has written. And I understand some of what we see in the Bible today may be out of harmony with popular thought, popular culture. But if you're a believer, a follower of God, a follower of Yahweh, Jehovah God, follower of the I Am, a follower of the one who is your God, as a believer in him, this is what he says. This is what we do. These are the things we don't do. He gets to make the rules. Question number 3. Why is it easier to obey someone if you value them? Think about that. If you really love somebody, how do you relate to them? Take a little bit of time and think about that. And that'll lead us back around to how we evaluate and honor God. And that's really a 4th question. Why do we have such trouble honoring authority? Why do we have such trouble with that? You might want to look at a verse that's found in Isaiah 53. There's a little verse there that talks about all we like sheep. Maybe you can quote it. Maybe you need to go look it up. But we have trouble with authority. So think this through. Remember this. A moral standard, the 10 Commandments and otherwise, only works if we know the God who made it. Otherwise, it is deficient in and of itself. It comes to us from a God. It came to us from the mouth of God. And since it came from God himself, then there is the connection point. Now, one more thing in this verse, and I want you to look on. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Out of Egypt, out of bondage. Okay? Here's the great thing. God gets to make the rules, but God redeems before we obey. Think about it. He redeems us, calls us into a relationship, calls us into his family, takes us out of bondage before we obey. We obey because we are redeemed. We're not redeemed because we obey. This is a very important, subtle but important reality. And I found this quote. Let me just read it to you. It's in your discussion guide. And I don't know who to give credit to for this, but I found this a great quote. God gave the commandments not to redeem people, but he gave the 10 Commandments to a redeemed people. So he starts with the relationship, and I see that in very clear contrast and relief right here in this chapter. Before you get to verse 3, he says, remember who I am. I am the Lord, your God, the one who brought you out of Egypt, delivered you from bondage, and so forth. We have this connection, and he redeems us. He redeems us from that. Now, redemption is a transaction. It's primarily a financial transaction of some sort. And I want you to think with me about what that required of God, and then we'll get into the discussion questions. But what it required of God was a payment. And the payment ultimately in those 10 plagues upon Egypt, the 10th one was there had to be a sacrificial animal. A lamb was slain. That was celebrated thereafter in Passover. Jesus fulfills that role, and it's a beautiful Old Testament picture of Christ. He is the Lamb of God who died for us. Redemption is through the blood of Christ, ultimately. Hope you've trusted in him. Hope you're walking with him and enjoying that reality. But he redeemed us, and then we obey. Okay? So let's think about that for just a moment. And you stop and you think about these questions, discuss them if you're with someone else or the small group. How would you imagine a life of bondage? Why does he call it a house of bondage? I'm not going to give you any help on this one. You're all on your own with that, but you think through. There's some great things that's going to unpackage for you. And then from what have you been set free? When he talks about bondage, what was broken for them? You can think about that. But what were you in bondage to that you no longer are bound to, tied to? None of us would enjoy bondage. No one would enjoy being tied up. But there were some things that we were tied up in that God has set us free from. What were they? Give them names. Give them some sharing with others. And then how was this accomplished in your life? How did God set you free? You share that. You'll be an encouragement to someone else. And as you recount those things for yourself, as it flows through your mind, it's going to encourage you. Okay? Question number 3. Why does God announce who he is, their connection to him, before the commandments? Why this order? We've already kind of talked about it. I've probably given this answer away. So I've already, spoiler alert, that should have been given earlier. But why does he do it in that order? That's an important thing to understand. And how does obeying, even if we don't feel like it, honor God? Because sometimes maybe we want to do something different than what God calls us to do. Maybe someone is pushing us to do something different than what God wants us to do. If that's the case, we need to come back to obeying, even if it's maybe not what we feel we should do or we want to do or even our nature wants us to do. But how does obeying honor God? It's not just, yep, check it off. It's not just about the law. It's about the relationship. And maybe you can think about your own relationships. If someone does something pleasing to you or takes your advice or your direction, how does that make you feel? How do you respond? Or if someone just says, nope, not listen to you, or they go a different way than you, how does that make you feel? Well, then try to magnify that in your mind and your imagination. How does that make God feel? How does that make God feel? Well, before the Ten Commandments, he starts with relationship. God's rules for life are based on a relationship. Remember our opening statement. A moral standard only works if we know the God who made it. And this God gets to make the rules, and this God, in mercy and grace, redeemed us before he calls us to obey. And then we obey in a way that pleases him and honors him. You've been set free from major bondage, so have I, if you're a believer in Christ. Enjoy that freedom today and keep thinking about this wonderful relationship. And as we deepen that relationship, I think it's going to deepen our obedience as well. We'll see you next time for Session 4.